All right. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the early part of the morning with our opening ceremony, the state of the chamber, the state of the city, and thank you again to our mayor for providing that. And then the sessions. I was part of housing, jobs, and mobility, and there was great conversation there. Not enough time, but you may have been in the restaurant, retail, and tourism, and I think there was great conversation there as well. Also, one that I would have loved to be a part of. Our second session with the Bridging the Digital Divide showed that there was amazing thought leaders there, but that the solution, or at least the ultimate solution, is a work in progress. And then finally, you either just joined us from the health, wellness, and the future, which was a powerhouse of doctors and leaders. And of course, my phone would ring in the middle of it, because why not? But I also wanted to say you may have been part of our resiliency and the face of energy. So thank you to all of our panelists. You guys have done an amazing job. I'm excited to introduce a gentleman here who will be introducing our keynote. But Optimum Seismic has been partner in this event. They were the presenting sponsor last year. They are again this year. They're also a Chair Circle member, a Platinum Chair Circle member for the Chamber. And I'm joined today by Tom Robinson, who is their senior advisor for Optimum Seismic. So, Tom, I'd love to turn it over to you to share a few words for Optimum and then introduce our keynote.
Thank you, Colin. Some of the audience has already heard about Optimum Seismic. We are a full-service seismic retrofit company serving businesses and multifamily housing industries throughout California. We've been operating since 1984 and have completed more than 3,500 projects in California. With that, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today. Kevin Klowden is Executive Director and Managing Economist for the Center for Regional Economics in California Center of the Milken Institute in Santa Monica. The expanding and increasingly high-profile Center for Regional Economics and its California Center focuses on key economic development, job creation, and human capital issues affecting regional economies in the United States and globally. His key areas of focus are business and workforce climate issues, technology, and entertainment, how California interacts and competes in the world economy, and investments in infrastructure and international trade. Kevin serves as chair of the Trade Finance Advisory Committee of the U.S. Department of Commerce, member of the Dean's Leadership Board of the School of Engineering at California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. He's also chairman emeritus of the LAX Area Advisory Committee. Kevin oversees the Milken Institute's Best Performing Cities Index and is also on the boards of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce and the Asia Society of Southern California. I'm sure that we're all looking forward to hearing Kevin's thoughts and insights on our economic outlook and the state of the recovery. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Tom, and it's my pleasure to be here and speaking with everybody virtually on what has been a nice, mildly rainy day. Just so everybody knows, I'm going to go ahead and while I'm talking, I will have a slide presentation that I'll be doing, but I'll also be giving general comments and discussing things more readily. I'm going to bring the slide presentation up momentarily, and so we can discuss a bit about the economic state that Culver City is more broadly in, building obviously on the great sessions earlier today, as well as a lot about what's going on in Southern California. I am going to talk a bit about COVID. I'm going to talk a bit about potential economic recovery issues and otherwise. And the plan is that if there are any questions at the end, then I should hopefully be able to take them. So thank you very much to everybody, and thank you for your patience. So I'm going to go ahead. It's giving me a bit of a fit. So here, let's see what we can do. No, it's no, not doing that one. It's
You
giving
need
me
to
a fit and
share,
falling in it.
you need to share the presentation.
It's not
not
letting
your
me.
screen.
It's not letting me. Here, just give me a second here. Try now. See if it lets it. Can everybody see it now?
Perfect. Yes.
All right, great. So for everybody, so what we've got is in the issue of regional economics here in Culver City and how it's functioning as part of a larger economy. Uh, One of the things that in particular that's important, just in terms of this, is that a lot that when we talked a year ago, we were dealing with a number of regional issues that we were concerned about. A number of them relating to the pandemic at the time. We did not have a vaccine yet. We did not have a number of different measures, particularly focused from the state on reopening. We were going through a second closure wave and a second peak of COVID, particularly at the time being driven by a native California variant that was not given a Greek letter designation, that was particularly significant and important, and that came in and essentially proceeded to mean that California did not get the wave of COVID that came from the UK and particularly affected most of the rest of the country. However, we're in a very different world right now, and some very good things have happened in the interim and some not as great things. And I want to talk a bit about that and where we stand. So, excuse me. When dealing with the regional geography of Culver City, it's worth remembering that when it comes to cities, that Culver City, especially given the way that it grew and developed, whether it was the stretch out west to once upon a time was the old Hughes aircraft helicopter facility and is now the Costco, whether it was the annexation of the Fox Hills area. Culver City has a geography that's inextricably linked to the rest of the west side of Los Angeles, as well as central LA and elsewhere. Now, in terms of the principal employers in the 2020 numbers, Sony Pictures and Westfield, as of 2020, remained the top employers, with Southern California Hospital, the Culver City Unified School District, the city of Culver City, also being there. NFL Media, because of their headquarters of the NFL Network, and various others. Now, it's worth noting when you look at these numbers, and yes, the data uh, actually still classifies Symantec as Symantec, even though the official name on the building is Norton LifeLock. That this does not yet include Apple or Amazon or even HBO, which you would expect that when we look at the 2021 numbers, when we have that data, which we won't have until after the end of this year, that we'll see those rising up. And at some point, if NFL Networks goes ahead with its move down by the Rams stadium, obviously they will move out. But for right now, these are the principal employers. And if you look at it, it's a mixture of retail, a mixture of technology and entertainment, a mixture of public employers, particularly the school district and the city. That's not uncommon, and it's fairly consistent. The key distinction really is that entertainment side, particularly Sony Pictures, and the technology side. You know, as companies like TikTok grow, as companies in the tech entertainment space grow, and as you see those numbers go up, that's going to continue to put pressure on Culver City, and in terms of people coming in terms of traffic, in terms of resources, while at the same time providing a boost, hopefully not only to the restaurant and retail scenes, but overall to the city's coffers. Private sector, it's worth noting that Culver City is a much stronger concentration of professional, scientific, and technical services, education, in than the rest of LA County. Healthcare, in spite of having the one hospital, it's not as well as the urgent care clinics and other facilities, is not as concentrated in Culver City as some other places in LA County. Information, meaning especially computers, even things relating to entertainment otherwise, as well as in terms of the technical side. And as you can see, our entertainment recreation further down, Culver City naturally stands out a lot more. But the Culver City is much more of a services oriented and high end services oriented economy. What that does mean is that that the average jobs tend to pay better, the concentration's better, but it also the combination of that, as well as the concentration of tech entertainment jobs in Silicon Beach and the surrounding area, has significantly contributed to the rise in terms of housing and rents. Unemployment, as you can see here in Culver City, has actually done rather well. LA County has been significantly more affected by the pandemic because of impacts on tourism, impacts in terms of the supply chain slowdowns, impacts in terms of a number of the various service related jobs, in larger construction jobs, various factors. Unemployment has continued to stay higher in the county as a whole. Culver City was absolutely affected more than California as a whole, in part because, once again, Culver City is tied in not only to entertainment production, which was definitely and significantly affected earlier in the pandemic, but is still affected by tourism and retail disproportionately. And even if not as much so as, say, a place like Beverly Hills or Santa Monica, it's still a factor. So, but as time's gone on, Culver City has managed to align more closely with the overall California unemployment rate. As you can see, even though there was a slight shift up briefly in September, it's continued generally to move down. The latest numbers we expect will continue to move down around about 6.5% unemployment, which is actually quite good, if not ahead of the pre-pandemic era. The other thing also that we're seeing in California is that there has been, either because of COVID concerns, because of impacts, particularly on working mothers and women-owned businesses, because of the collapse of childcare and other factors, we have not seen a recovery in the employment rate as quickly in California as some other parts of the US. That remains an issue. And even though we've seen the overall economic productivity numbers and the overall GDP numbers recover, the employment has not recovered as swiftly. And that does include Culver City still not recovering quite to the same level, even that other parts of the country may have. Now, this is a little bit complicated, but the main thing you need to know in terms of how small businesses are doing in metropolitan areas is that small businesses really took a hit in LA. It not only was there a larger negative effect, which is closer to 24% of small businesses saying that things were not well, but only that only 19 under 19% of small businesses have said they've been able to fully return back to normal operation. This is compared to a national average of 22% saying a large negative effect, uh, and a national average of 20.5% on the fact that they're saying that in terms of how businesses feel in terms of normal level of operation. The main thing, just ultimately on this, to keep in mind and to be aware of in this entire circumstance is the fact that the if you look at this, is that LA has been hit harder. It's not nearly been as bad as New York City, where New York, particularly, and even Houston, San Francisco, have really had problems with people not coming back into their urban commute patterns. Culver City is obviously still very much affected. LA is definitely affected. places that have recovered the best, quite honestly, small and mid-sized places, places that were not hit as hard by the pandemic either early or in general, and didn't see the same level of small business closures. But regardless of anything else, everybody's hurting. All small businesses are hurting. Culver City is not alone. LA is not alone. We've had, this is just, something you can look at and look at the details later, but there are numerous closed businesses, especially personal services, things where you had small businesses that were particularly affected by not being able to reach their customers earlier in the pandemic. You had things like apparel manufacturing especially hit, specialty trade contractors, the professional technical services. There are a lot of different businesses all over the place that were especially affected and continue to be affected by this. And even though we've seen a number of business starts that have come in, there is still a huge amount of different firms that just haven't been able to reopen. Here's the list of the different categories that we've seen in terms of Culver City, different kinds of companies that have shut down their operations for different categories, different reasons. And just the point of this is that not to go through all and stare at it, and I'll make this available later, is that it's all over the place. You've had businesses of everything ranging from performing arts companies to pet care to automotive maintenance to independent artists, writers, and performers, to uh, advertising, to one's right now full service restaurant. But uh, and even with this potentially lagging, this is still significant, and there are a number of different businesses that have reported in on here, and that impact will continue to be felt. And when you see the closures, just realize that as hard as it is in Culver City, look at downtown Santa Monica, look at parts of downtown Los Angeles and elsewhere. It's not nearly as bad as it could have been. And I'm not saying this to say it wasn't hard, and it isn't hard, but it is significant, and it's worth keeping that in mind, in that it's affected everybody. Culver City in particular, it's really significant that we have a recovery in terms of retail. And that's particularly important in terms of the tax base, because as time has gone on, sales tax has become considerably more important in the city. Property tax, which was a much bigger deal a number of years ago, has been much smaller portion overall in terms of in terms of the revenue sources, for a whole slew of reasons. But we're also, when you see it in terms of various other sources of taxes, if you're looking at it in terms of various charges for services, there's the shift really, what it suggests more than anything else, is that Culver City is much more dependent in terms of where it gets its revenue and how, on sales tax, than it was a decade ago. And obviously, we'll know more as time goes on. But even though things that have stayed flat, like the utility user tax, has largely stayed flat. And if you look at it, the other various tax revenue sources have stayed flat. Uh, Property tax shifted significantly down, and the the overall shift has very much been to a sales tax revenue collection. And even city licenses are down. But it definitely is that kind of change, and it's worth noting that for Culver City to have a full effective recovery, we really need that element. In terms of market values, Culver City continues to creep up. In particular, if you look at it, it's creeping up towards $1.4 million. That is significant and important because it means that Culver City is not sort of the same middle class, more affordable place that it was a decade or 2 decades ago. It hasn't been creeping up nearly as readily all around the city as, say, Beverly Hills, which is inflated by some insane prices up in the hills, or by Santa Monica. But it is important that even as these places become more and more expensive, that it does have an impact on who can live and work here. If you look at the impact on teachers in the school district, the impact on average workers, and how they're affected, it does absolutely have impacts. And the ability to both live and work in Culver City or in the immediate surrounding area is absolutely affected. And one of the things that also happens is as we bring in more high end jobs, such as the Apples of the world or the HBOs or any others, and it does create a pressure on the local housing and supplants a certain amount of that. The catch is also is that where it's particularly having that impact and that effect, and that one of the key draws of Culver City that has shown up anecdotally and has shown up in the numbers ever since Playa Vista was built is the fact that Culver City has as a source of family housing, particularly single family housing, and particularly the demand for that has remained considerably high, in part to have access to the school district, in part to have access to Culver City services, because Playa Vista and the surrounding area just doesn't have the same level of family housing and other sources. And in the pandemic, where we saw a considerable demand, not just locally, but around the country, and heavens knows, especially in New York and San Francisco, for homes where people could live and work from home, let alone if they had families and were stuck having the kids go to school remotely. That demand for larger houses in many ways peaked several months ago. It's not clear how much that is going to sustain. It's certainly, if you look at the numbers locally, it's tended to level off a bit over the last couple months. Yeah. Commute time. This is another factor that's particularly important, is that Culver City actually benefits from people, at least in 2019, before the pandemic starting, of having shorter commutes. Not although Culver City over the last 2 years has surpassed the average U.S. commute time, it's still well below the average Culver City one. That's part because of Culver City's geography, and that's part because of the fact that people have been able generally to afford places not that far away. The advantages of having the mass transit line obviously help, but as well as potentially good busing service and otherwise. But one of the things that's really, really significant and important, and we'll see this in how things are affected, especially with efforts to redo traffic flows, is that it's worth remembering that people don't want to change who are using mass transit, don't want to change their form of mass transit or transit in general more than once if they can help it. They will at most do twice. And that one of the key things in particular about Culver City is that it has a significant amount of traffic that flows through it going to other places because of its central location. But the key, especially, is that for Culver City is this issue of access and accessibility. And that the question is, if traffic goes up too much and for any factor or any reason, and it can have a severely detrimental effect both in terms of people's work-life balance as well as the effect on retail. So the need for having an effective balance on that is incredibly important in thinking that through, even beyond issues of sustainability. One of the things in terms of affordable housing, I apologize as my computer keeps having some fits, is the fact that is that efforts are consistently being made, in terms of trying to incentivize in terms of uh, various transaction taxes and various other things, explicitly trying to tax, more expensive houses and various other things to try and bring more revenue into the city. But there's also that need, to address some of the resources, particularly as we have more businesses and others come in. The major thing that in particular that I want to bring up is the fact that Culver City right now, especially, is in a situation where it's facing a number of pressures that we're actually seeing more broadly in the U.S. And this is where I'll talk more about COVID, about the economic recovery, and things beyond the data. Right now, what we've seen is that as the pandemic happened, you saw a major drop in traffic, even in Los Angeles, even around the country. You saw people's commute patterns change, work patterns change, life patterns change. And it's very, very important to keep that in mind that we don't know yet what the new, what I wouldn't quite call it normal, but the new stable is. What, when people are going to eat indoors or outdoors, where they're going to go. Culver City lost its movie theaters during the pandemic, in part because the Pacific Theaters slash ArcLight uh, essentially tried tried a strategy essentially of trying to get out of its rents that it wasn't really able to do. And that has not yet been replaced. And there's a question of when and how that's going to happen. We've seen other businesses and restaurants and others affected. We have seen a number of impacts in terms of retail. We've seen impacts more broadly. And we don't know yet how things are going to settle and stabilize. Right now, if you're paying attention, you're going to see that there is a lot of discussions about the Omicron variant of COVID. Omicron is different. Delta was a one that basically we generally believe came out of India, but sort of built off of the prior COVID strains. Omicron is one that, according to the data, essentially probably and the research probably came from somebody who is immune compromised, probably with HIV, definitely in South Africa, and that they probably fought it for months because it doesn't have as much in common with Delta or the other recent variants. It appears to have branched off earlier. Why does this matter? It matters because it functions a bit differently and it is a lot more contagious. We are going to have another wave. We are definitely going to see impacts. We're not shutting down, however. I mean, I can tell you this right now. I've had that conversation. There is no political will to shut down, and there's no money to particularly support businesses in a shutdown. But we are going to likely see more pushes for more restrictions, especially mask wearing, especially on people in your holiday gatherings. Uh, the US is well behind the UK, Germany, and others in terms of making sure that people have their access to the various, pharmacy bought ready tests, let alone having them be free. But I can tell you right now is that this is going to be something that you should want to do and have. You should be mindful of this and be aware of this because Omicron is capable, based on what we've seen so far, of getting around vaccinations. You will be a lot safer with a vaccination. You will not likely go into the hospital or anything else. But if you have a booster or access to one, get it. If you're going to be able to wear a mask around people, do it. I'm not saying this because I'm trying to just advocate, but I'm just saying in terms of in terms of your economic and business impact, it is something that's going to be an issue. It is something that's going to affect workers. It's going to affect everybody.
On that.
We don't know where, when this is finally going to peter out. We don't know when. We do know that eventually coronaviruses, as they've operated in the past, tend to slowly but surely resolve down to something that's more contagious and a lot less dangerous as it works the way through populations. We just don't know what point that time is. In terms of the overall economy, it's worth noting that we are in the middle of what's viewed as an incredibly fast economic recovery. In a lot of different ways. But when we talk about it, we realize it's sort of a K-shaped recovery, as they call it, because you're seeing a situation where the people at the top are recovering a lot faster. If you're connected to technology and tech related firms, which definitely impacts the number of people in Culver City, if you're in a position, all that, you're doing well. If you're tied into tourism, well, who knows when we're going to see tourists from China, let alone much of Asia, anytime soon. Who knows when we're going to see that kind of recovery on tourism? Who knows when we're going to see that kind of recovery in terms of live events and various other things? We're not sure of. So ultimately, what we need to know and be aware of is and recognize, particularly for a place like Culver City, where you know Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy are back. Even we're seeing productions go on the Sony lot, on Culver Studios. And we're seeing lots of different activity. We're seeing firms expanding. All of that's really good news. But the question is, how do we stabilize it, and what's our overall impact? And I'd like to tell you that we know exactly where it's going to be, but this is uncharted territory for us. And the last time the U.S. faced coming out of a pandemic was 100 years ago, and we were also coming out of World War I. And it's a very different situation in a very different world. So that's pretty much it. But I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has them. Otherwise, just wishing everybody happy holidays.
Well, as always, great information. I was feverishly taking notes, and then I remembered that I had a copy of your presentation. So I'm going to put you on the spot. I know last year you're gracious enough to allow us to share that with attendees. So if you're open to that again this year, I'll make it available to those that are viewing today.
Well, I'm happy certainly to do that. I realized, as I always do, I'm a critic of my own slides. I realized there's at least one slide I need to make a couple corrections on. But other than that, I will absolutely have it and make it available for everybody. Yeah, I'm happy to share the slides. And if there's other things that people have questions on or want to ask, there's a lot of stuff I didn't go into detail on that I'd be happy to talk about.
And I appreciate that. And something worth noting, I think you mentioned in the beginning, but I can't remember if it was this year or last year. Besides the amazing work you do and how much you're pulled into different spaces, you're a Culver City resident. And so you've experienced and seen it from a macro and kind of economic level, but you're also here, at ground level, if you will, and have seen the impacts of the changes. And that's rather unique. I mean, we've partnered and participated with different thought leaders in the economy space in the past, and very few, I don't think of any that I can think of that I've worked with that actually live in the area that they're reporting on or about. So that's another added conduit to it, because there's a certain amount of pride and passion in what you're reporting on. It's not just numbers on a page.
Well, absolutely, and you're right. And I've been a Culver City resident for well over 2 decades, and I absolutely support local businesses. I spend plenty of time here, have had 3 kids go through the public schools in Culver City, and there are and I see a lot. And one of the things that's very much true is that in addition, obviously, to connections here, I spend time dealing with stuff around the county and around the state. I just been having conversations with including with the governor's office and with various others about just what kind of issues we're facing and what comes next. But we sometimes say is that we talk about all politics are local. Is it really? That's less true now, unfortunately, as people get more and more information off of strange and random sources and otherwise. But I'll say this is that regardless of what your positions are, what you believe in terms of the other issues, the most important things you should know is that we have to. We are dealing with both a combination of unprecedented things, making choices and changes that are unprecedented, but we also have to look at what the impacts are and what kind, whether it's the city and the city's policies, and looking at, when you put in a new strategy for for city development or a new strategy for anything else, is that one of the big things that I made this warning a year ago, and I actually made this warning a few years ago. I talked in front of the city council a long time ago. As I said, is you have to look at sustainability as it's not just a matter of affordability. It's a matter of making sure that people can get to their jobs, that they are able to park, that they're able to drive around, to have access. In that first mile, last mile issue is a huge one. And for Culver City, even though we have a light rail station, having those connections to get to it or to get to any of the other businesses, both for people to get to work here or to be able to work somewhere else and get that first mile, last mile it's incredibly hard. And getting it right is going to take some real forethought and some real work. And I'll tell you, having talked with the staff at Metro a number of times, it's the biggest challenge they have, and it's the biggest one for us too.
I agree with you 100%. I was in the housing, jobs, and mobility session, and one of the things that I shared was I started 4 years ago, and the only things we were dealing with then was parking, mobility, and housing, which we're still, obviously dealing with now, plus some other items. So I definitely appreciate the time. We'll make the slides available for those of you that attended today. Hopefully you got some great content and thought kind of for the future leading out of this, but we will, again, I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Kevin, but I'd love to connect offline and look at a deeper dive workshop of sorts that we can do in 2022 outside of this event. I think there's, most of the time people follow up after this and say, comment on some of the thoughts that you shared and what they really appreciated or didn't know and would like to dive deeper on. So hopefully we can pry you away from some of the national outlets that you're connecting with to do something again in Culver City. But thank you, and thank you to our sponsors today, all of the panelists that participated, and equally important, all of you that attended. There will be recordings of all these sessions, including the portions on stage that'll be made available. Those will likely go out on Monday, since it's not likely tomorrow, but most likely on Monday. And then the final thing, hopefully you have a happy holidays, safe holidays, enjoy time with family and friends in a safe way. January 28th, mark your calendars. It's going to be our 2022 installation gala and centennial celebration. We're looking forward to a rather large overture, and hopefully we'll be further away from the start of the pandemic, if you will. So thank you again. Hopefully you all have a good rest of your day, and we will see you in the new year, if not sooner. Thank you, Kevin.
Happy holidays.